I wonder why he's going to have Mal call Mr. Lester's wife. They were getting close to the potato chip factory, and Winston was a bundle of jittery nerves. A whole lot of things had to work out in the next few minutes. For one thing, he didn't know if Carl Lester was married. For another, would his telephone number be in the phone book? Would the wife, if she existed, be home? After a day when luck had turned against them at every opportunity, it seemed like Winston was now asking for an awful lot to go right. The first part worked out. They called information and got the number of the only Carl Lester in the phone book. "Do you know what to do?" Mel said to Winston. "I got it. No problem." "I don't know why I'm agreeing to this," said Mr. Garvey. "Do you want to make the call yourself?" Winston asked. Mr. Garvey said loudly, I don't think we should be calling the woman at all." "Too late. I'm dialing," said Mel. Mr. Garvey pulled into the parking lot of Simon's Snack Foods and navigated around to the visitors' area. He pulled into a spot and shut off the engine. Winston looked at the modern building connected to the old-fashioned factory. It felt like a year since they'd been here last. Mal finished dialing. Everyone in the car was watching him. He cleared his throat like an actor about to take the stage, which is exactly what he was. "Are you sure he can do this?" Mr. Garvey said. "I'm sure. Now, shh." He'd never shushed a teacher before. Someone must have picked up because Mal suddenly said, "Ah, hello, is this Mrs. Lester?" The voice that came out of his 12-year-old body was all of a sudden surprisingly mature and adult. Mr. Garvey's jaw dropped a few inches. Brendan Root wasn't the only kid who could disguise his voice on the phone. Mal continued. "Good afternoon, Mr. Lester. Mrs. Lester. I'm Malcolm. I'm calling from Bronco Towing. I believe it was your husband, Carl Lester. Is that right? Yes. I believe it was your husband who had a flat tire a couple months ago and required our services. We like to call our customers to see if they were satisfied. Is he there?" "No." "Well, do you know if he was pleased with his towing experience?" This was for a flat tire he had about 2 months ago. Drove over some broken glass, as I recall." He looked up then, his eyes shining as he continued his conversation. "No? There was no flat tire? Are you sure?" He nodded again. The woman was sure. "Well, maybe I have the wrong Carl Lester. What does your husband do for a living?" Now Mel gave a euphoric fist bump, punching the roof of the car. "Ah, he's an educator. No, I think my Carl Lester did something else. I must have the wrong number. You have a good day anyway. Thank you very much. Goodbye." He hung up smiling. Winston and Jake applauded with gusto. Mr. Garvey shook his head in wonder. I was told you worked backstage for the drama club," he said. "Well, someday I'll get on stage," Mal said happily. "I believe you will." "So they didn't have a flat tire," Mal said. 2 months ago. Not as long as she can remember. Carl Lester lied. This proves it." Mr. Garvey held up a hand. "It doesn't prove anything. It's a very interesting piece of information, but it's a long way from proof." "What else can we do?" Jake said. Winston looked out the back window. More cars were piling in. More teams coming back to see who won. And here, right in time, was the team from West Meadow, Carl Lester at the wheel, looking jubilant. Brendan was in the passenger seat, and the other 2 teammates were in the back. One of them was pounding his fists on the ceiling and howling with glee. "We can't let them get away with it. What are we going to do?" Jake asked again. Nobody had the answer. After some silence, Mr. Garvey undid his seatbelt and opened his door. "Well, whatever's going to happen, we better go inside for it. Come on." More cars had pulled into the parking lot by now, and there was a slow, ragged parade going back into the offices of Simon's Snacks. Everybody looked pretty much like Winston felt, hot, tired, and fed up. They found themselves walking side by side with the team from Lincoln, and even though the competition was over, Winston still felt a few glares being sent in their direction from Mr. Garvey's math rivals. Winston glanced at Mal, and they both shook their heads. Who knew competitive math was such a blood sport? His stomach rumbled. Didn't Dimitri Simon say something about having a barbecue? Yeah, Winston thought. He did. Good. All Winston had eaten today were those cereal bars, a small bag of chips, and a few sips of water. They filed through the lobby and back down toward the conference room. The teams had blown out of their hours earlier like a stampede of bulls, but on the return trip there was a much more subdued group, exhausted, muscles sore from all the walking and running, voices hoarse from yelling. It had been a great day, and even when you figured in the cheater and his own single-minded math teacher, Winston had to admit he had a fun time. Thank goodness his friends had been there. All the teams automatically sat in the seats they occupied in the morning, as if doing otherwise would have violated some unwritten law. At each place was a small booklet. Want more puzzles? It said. Winston flipped through it. It looked indeed like a bunch more puzzles by Dimitri Simon. Excellent. Winston put it in his backpack for later. His back pocket. Everyone could tell who had won. The West Meadow team was the only team wearing smiles. They accepted congratulations from the other team sitting next to them. Carl Lester pumped the other teacher's hand like he'd just been elected mayor. With everyone back in their original seats, it was clear some teams had not returned. The DeMille Academy was gone, as Mr. Garvey said. They had taken their fancy clothes back home. The New Easton team was also gone. The girl on their team had been locked into the bathroom. That must have thrown a little scare into them even before the cheater and his memo pad were revealed. The Kennedy team, their computer lost or stolen, had not come back to see how things turned out. The missing teams stood out like gaps in a smile, and Winston felt a pang of shame that it was his teacher who had talked two of them into dropping out. Dimitri Simon and his associates came in through the stage door, and there was a small round of applause, less wild and raucous than at the start of the event. Winston looked around and saw some teams weren't clapping at all. Mr. Regal, the coach of the Brookfield Braves, had his arms crossed and a scowl on his face. A few other people around the room wore similar expressions. Simon looked pleased, though, as he took his place behind the podium. Welcome back, everybody! Well, almost everybody. You all look hot and tired, but I sure hope you had a good time. I hope you're hungry, too, because we have 1,000 pounds of food in the picnic area behind the factory. There were some cheers. Jake said to Mr. Garvey, I don't think you're going to get a chance to speak to him before he awards the winner. Mr. Garvey rubbed his forehead. I'm thinking. We seem to have lost a couple of teams, said Simon. That's too bad, but more food for the rest of us, I guess. And he patted his belly with a grin. Mr. Regal, arms still crossed tightly, yelled out, What are you going to do about the cheater who's running around, huh? Dimitri Simon looked startled. He wasn't even sure who had yelled that or why. The cheater? What do you mean? And then suddenly everybody was yelling. It was impossible to hear anybody's words from the look on Simon's face. He was getting the general gist, though. Something had gone wrong with his carefully planned event. He waved his hands, trying to get things under control. All right, settle down, everybody. Quiet slowly descended over the room again. Simon let the silence drag on for a little bit while he thought of what he was going to say next. Winston glanced over to Carl Lester and West Meadow. Mr. Lester looked the smallest bit nervous. Or maybe that was Winston's imagination. This is the first I'm hearing of this, said Dimitri Simon. Someone cheated? Really? I don't see how. Did somebody steal the answers from another team? Did someone steal the answers from me? He gave us a flat tire. yelled the coach of the Brains. He broke the Ferris wheel, yelled Rod Denham of Lincoln Junior High. All right, he had a kid stuck on the wheel too. Dimitri Simon was astonished. He broke the Ferris wheel? How does one break a Ferris wheel? He locked a girl in the bathroom back at the farm. This was Bethany doing the yelling. Simon looked at her, even more disturbed. There was some more shouting. People were starting to overlap each other again. Simon once again called for quiet, and the yelling petered out. Simon looked to his associates, who looked neutral and calm. They shrugged back at their boss. All right, said Simon. Why didn't someone call me and tell me about this sooner? Your phone system's like another puzzle, the Brookfield Brains coach yelled out. A really hard one. Oh, Simon was thrown off balance. Well, we're going to look into this, I promise. We're not going to have a whole discussion right now. If you have any information about this cheater, please come up to me or one of my partners here. If we determine this event was compromised, we'll make amends. I swear to that. I'll make a donation to every school if I have to. One of the partners looked alarmed, and Simon said, Oh, calm down, Robert. I can do it from my own money. Robert, rebuked, took a step back and regained his calm expression. For now, however, we're going to proceed. We do have a winner, and I want to congratulate them. It was very exciting sitting here at the headquarters watching the answers come in. We thought for a while that nobody was going to solve that prison puzzle. You guys really had us nervous. But finally, one team managed to break through and get all the way to the end. So let's have a round of applause for the kids from West Meadow Junior High and their vice principal, Carl Lester. There was applause, dampened by the specter of the cheating scandal. Winston looked at Mr. Garvey, who was not applauding, and in fact was deeply frowning. They had hoped to tell Simon what they knew before West Meadow was officially declared the champs. This wasn't working out very well at all. Carl Lester led his boys down to the stage. One of Simon's assistants floated off the stage for a moment and returned with a 6-foot novelty check with $50,000 written in huge type. The assistant wasn't sure how to hold this giant thing and stumbled and fumbled into the center stage. Winston found himself getting to his feet. As the applause died down, and before Dimitri Simon could begin his speech, Winston called out, Brendan! Hey, Brendan! Everybody on the stage looked to see who was shouting. Mr. Garvey gave Winston an incredulous look. What are you doing? He said softly. I have an idea. Brendan, did your teacher tell you to call me? Brendan blinked rapidly. What? You called me a few days ago. You tried disguising your voice and you wouldn't tell me your name, but I know it was you. Did your teacher tell you to do that? Or did you do it on your own? Several heads turned back and forth between Winston and Brendan. They were all aimed at Brendan now. Simon interrupted this long conversation. Excuse me, my friend, he called back to Winston. I think this can wait. Don't you? I'm afraid it can't, said Mr. Garvey, getting to his feet as well. If you'll just give my student the benefit of the doubt for a moment, I think you'll see his question is very important. Throughout this, Winston kept his eyes on Brendan, who loved puzzles as much as him, maybe more. He thought Brendan was on the brink of solving one more puzzle, one he didn't necessarily want to solve. Looking small on stage, Brendan turned to look at his teacher, who was watching warily. Brendan then peered back at Winston, disappointed and maybe even grief on his boyish round face. Yes, Brendan had figured it out. People from other teams were complaining about a cheater, but Brendan's team hadn't been affected in the least. And now here was Winston asking a very unusual question. Yes, Brendan said. My teacher asked us to find out who would be on the other teams, and that's why I called you. One of Brendan's teammates said, Shut up! There was an explosion of muttering from the others in the room. Carl Lester, smiling, put a hand on Brendan's shoulder as if to lead him off stage. Winston called out again, "Mr. Lester, do you know why I asked Brendan that question?" Dimitri was no longer trying to hush Winston. In fact, he looked pretty interested in what Winston was saying. Mr. Lester didn't know where to go or what to do, so he looked up at Winston. "I'm really not sure what you're talking about, young man." "Well, we recovered some stuff from the man in the green jacket. That's the cheater that everybody's so upset about. He had a list of license plate numbers, and he also had a bunch of our names. I was on that list, for instance. So how did the teacher know I was going to be here?" "How? How would I know that?" Mr. Lester said. "You told your students to ask around. You told them to find out who was going to be here. You and your friend made up a list of people to watch out for. Kids you had to knock out of the way if you were going to win." "I did no such thing," said Mr. Lester. "How dare you?" "Yes, you did," said a new voice, and it wasn't Brendan. It was one of his teammates, one of those two brothers. The older brother turned and gasped at his betrayal, but the boy continued. "It's just like he said. You told us to guess who might be at this event. I told you her name. I told you her name, and he was pointing at Bethany. I remembered her from the science fair this year. I was on that list too. I'm Bethany Seymour." "Who else was on this list?" asked Dimitri Simon. Brendan's teammate continued, despite his brother's outrage. "My brother learned that a kid named Michael Scott was going to be here, and my teacher told us he thought a particular teacher, Mr. Dunham, would be here." "Well, I am here," said Rod Dunham, looking somehow affronted that he wasn't recognized. "Where is that list now?" Simon asked. Winston and his teammates looked at each other. Then Winston fished the memo pad out of the bag. All eyes turned to him as the bag crinkled and crackled. Carl Lester's eyes were filled with a growing panic. Everyone else watched with fascination. Winston walked down the aisle to the stage and handed the memo pad to Simon. "The last couple pages," Winston said. Simon flipped to the right spot and stared. After a moment, he said, "Breed, Seymour, Scott, Dunham, it's all right here. Escort this man to the small conference room and keep an eye on him. And call the police." "Wait," said Carl Lester, putting up his hands to keep grasping arms away from him. "Wait, this is crazy. Get away from me." Simon's men were not security guards. They didn't know how to restrain someone who didn't want to be restrained. Carl Lester didn't get away from them with the expertise of a secret agent. He fought back more like a child who didn't want to go and take a bath. But he escaped their grasp and made a break for the upstage door. One of the other men grabbed him and missed. There was chaos up on the stage now. Winston and Brendan jumped away as the men ran around the stage. Lester stormed by them, out the door, and was gone. "Oh, for crying out loud," said Dimitri Simon. "Go get him. Can't the three of you stop one guy from leaving a room? I don't want that guy running around my building. You go that way, and you go that way." He yelled at his men as they stumbled their way out of every possible exit. "Watch the parking lot. Don't let him get back to his car." Winston walked shakily back up to his team. Mel said to him, "It doesn't matter. Even if he gets back to his car, he's not getting anywhere." "What?" Winston said. "Why not?" "Maybe you'll notice that the last bottle is no longer in that plastic bag." Jake gasped. "You didn't?" "Oh, yeah," Mel said. "I gave him a back tire wedgie."